You think the price of gold is rising because of demand or war or supply chain chaos, and you want that story because it lets you stay passive. If you can blame geopolitics, then you don't have to look at the mechanism inside your own life. But the real truth is darker. Gold is rising because the system of paper promises is weakening, and people who understand the weakness are quietly forcing reality to cash the checks. This video is not here to hype you into buying anything. It's here to strip away the comforting lie that money is neutral and stable, and that markets are mostly about fundamentals. What you're seeing right now is an underground shift of trust. It's a battle over who gets to print value and who gets to redeem it. And once you understand the psychology of trust, you'll stop watching gold like it's a sports score and start seeing it like a thermometer for fear. Let's talk about the hidden self first, because this always comes down to what you're willing to confront. Most people don't fear gold. They fear being wrong about their worldview. They fear admitting that the money they've been trained to worship is only a system of belief. So they watch headlines, they scroll opinions, they wait for someone else to tell them what to think. And while they wait, someone else is buying insurance with cash they can't print. Gold has always moved when fear moves. But this time, the fear has structure. It's not a random panic. It's not just investors chasing returns. It's a deliberate stress test of a financial arrangement that has been operating like a magic trick for decades. The trick is called paper gold. And once you see the trick, you can't unsee it. Imagine you walk into a restaurant, you buy a steak coupon. The restaurant says, "Bring the coupon, we'll give you real beef." But in the kitchen, there is only a single steak. They print 100 coupons and sell them to 100 people, betting that nobody will all show up at the same time to demand beef. It's brilliant because it's profitable as long as everyone believes the coupon is as good as the steak. That is what paper gold is. It's the future, the certificate, the ETF, the agreement that says the gold exists somewhere, but not in your hands. It's a contract traded against an idea. And the entire machine relies on one thing: the market's confidence that redemption will never be enforced all at once. Now here's the psychological part most people never want to hear. People think markets are driven by money, but markets are driven by behavior under stress. And under stress, behavior follows a brutal logic. When you stop trusting, you stop waiting. You don't politely debate. You don't calmly hold and hope. You run to the door because you want the physical thing before it disappears. In the real world, physical gold is not printed. It has weight, it has storage, it has logistics, it has limits. Paper gold is light as a feather because it's only digits on a screen and paperwork in a vault. The problem is simple. If there are a lot more paper claims than physical metal, then paper is a compressed version of reality. It looks stable until a wave of people decide to convert their belief into something tangible. So when gold starts soaring, the surface story is often supply and demand. But beneath that, the deeper story is redemption pressure. It's people testing whether the promise matches the substance. And when the promise wobbles, price stops being just price. It becomes an alarm. It becomes a public confession that the old system is running on insufficient honesty. For years, Western markets have been built to keep the physical layer out of sight. Exchanges, clearing systems, intermediaries, all designed to make you forget there's a vault somewhere that can empty. You can trade an enormous number of claims while never touching a single bar. You can win profits while never asking the question, what happens if a large group of holders all decide to withdraw at once? That question is the hidden self question, because internally, almost every person you meet avoids that moment of accountability. They avoid it in love, they avoid it with money, they avoid it with identity, they avoid it by living as if the contract will always hold, they avoid it by pretending that consequences are theoretical. Well, financial systems don't do theoretical, they do mechanics. If redemption arrives faster than replenishment, the claim stops being abstract and starts being painful. That is why gold rising is not just an asset story, it's a trust story. And trust is psychology. Now let's look at what shifted, because this isn't just a spontaneous mood. Something changed in the infrastructure and the rules of the game. A major player pushed a different model: more physical settlement, more transparency, more direct conversion between claims and metal. The name you keep hearing is the Shanghai Gold Exchange, often referred to as SGE. SGE matters because it's built for physical exchange. When people buy there with the expectation of getting actual gold, the process forces the system to behave like reality. Money goes in, metal comes out. Series are traceable. Storage is not just a vague promise. This isn't just finance, it's messaging. And the message is blunt. It says to the world, stop treating gold like a rumor, come hold the real thing. If you want value, don't outsource it to paperwork. Don't hide inside London or New York conventions while metal disappears somewhere behind closed doors. The East is signaling that it wants to weaken the Western price-setting monopoly by shifting demand toward physical benchmarks. If you've ever wondered why price discrepancies matter, think about how markets actually form expectations. If the physical price in one place consistently runs higher than the paper price in another, that's not a small glitch. That's the market telling you the paper is discounted because it's less enforceable. It's like a housing contract that looks legal until you try to move in. The gap is the price of uncertainty. Now add one more psychological ingredient: opportunity for arbitrage. People with money and timing love gaps. They don't romanticize, they don't write poems about fairness. They see mispricing and they harvest it. Here's the mechanism as it's often described. The physical gold price in Shanghai runs higher than the paper gold price in Western markets. Smart actors use USD to buy paper claims cheaply on Western venues. Then, instead of settling with cash like the system expects, they insist on delivery. They take the metal, ship it, and sell it where it's more expensive. This is not a peaceful flow of wealth, it's a pump, and the pump is draining the Western physical layer. You can call it arbitrage, but the effect is what matters. The physical supply gets stressed, and when physical supply gets stressed, the system starts to reveal its weaknesses. That's where the Western dilemma shows up, and it's ugly. If Western exchanges make delivery cheap and easy, then physical gold can drain quickly, and the credibility of their claims collapses. If they restrict withdrawals, increase fees, add bureaucratic friction, and limit the amount you can take, they keep the machine running, but they also admit that physical metal is scarce. Notice the psychological trap here. Every attempt to control the process either damages transparency or damages accessibility, and both reduce trust. So they either expose emptiness or they expose manipulation. Either way, you lose legitimacy. In many discussions about this situation, people claim there are signs of extreme measures. Reports mention increased storage costs, complicated procedures, and even the idea that metal might be sourced through intermediaries rather than through the available reserves the public thinks exist. Even if you don't verify every claim, the pattern of behavior is consistent with a system under strain. When physical reality contradicts paper promises, someone has to fill the gap. And when the gap is filled with borrowed time, the final reckoning eventually arrives. Borrowed time always costs something. Sometimes it costs money, sometimes it costs reputation, sometimes it costs stability. Now let's zoom out for a moment because the hidden self behind all this is a question of identity. People identify with the system they grew up believing. They say, this is how money works, as if money is a natural law like gravity. They treat the dollar and its associated structures like the center of reality, but when you learn that the center is actually a managed arrangement of trust, it starts to feel personal, like betrayal. That's why these shifts are so painful, not because gold is magical, because people realize the world they were told to trust is partly theatrical, and the ego hates theater when it stops paying out. We also have to address why physical gold accumulation can be hidden. Large players can buy slowly enough that prices don't rocket immediately because they want to secure reserves without paying a sky-high premium for each additional bar. If you announce we are buying thousands of tons, you invite a stampede. Prices jump first, and then your future purchases become more expensive. So secrecy can be rational, but secrecy also has another psychological function. It prevents public panic from forming too early. It keeps opponents from adjusting their strategy. It keeps markets from pricing your actions before you finish them. In geopolitical terms, information is armor. If you're planning a long campaign, you don't show your entire logistics plan on day one. The numbers people discuss vary widely because official figures often lag, and independent analysts rely on trade patterns, production estimates, and import flows. Even without arguing about any single figure, the direction of behavior matters. Accumulation implies preparation, and preparation implies strategy. Now, to understand the strategy, you have to understand the deeper battle. This is not only about gold as jewelry, it is about gold as a financial escape route. The dollar system is powerful because it's widely used in trade. It creates a dependency. Countries don't just want dollars, they need dollars to transact. And if you can control the flow of dollars, you can control the conditions under which others operate. For a lot of people, the real awakening happened when sanctions showed how quickly assets can turn into leverage. When large sums of foreign reserves can be frozen, the lesson becomes clear. The dollar is not guaranteed in the way people emotionally assume. It can be weaponized, it can be revoked. If you're a serious actor, you don't respond with slogans. You respond with redundancy. You build an alternative you can access when the main channel gets shut. Gold is one of the few alternatives that is not dependent on a single political gatekeeper. It has no issuer. It can't be turned off by a press conference. So the logic goes like this. If USD-based access becomes unreliable, nations seek settlement mechanisms that reduce dependence. That can involve swapping currencies directly for trade. It can involve using different payment rails, and it can involve linking certain transactions to assets with long-term credibility. That's where the idea of a gold-backed system, sometimes described as a modern ghost standard, enters the conversation. The point is not that someone is resurrecting an old textbook arrangement exactly. The point is that gold can function as a trust anchor. It offers a tangible promise. You can exchange value for metal, not just for another claim. When Russia and China coordinate economic mechanisms, the message is also strategic. China is often described as manufacturing capacity and demand. Russia is described as supply of energy and commodities. Together, they can build a belt of trade that doesn't require as much Western payment infrastructure. And this changes psychology for everyone watching. If major trade partners increasingly settle outside USD routines, the demand for USD can weaken over time. And demand for USD isn't only about investment, it's about transaction needs. If you need dollars less often, the dollar becomes less embedded. And when embedding weakens, the incentives to hold it shift. So what happens if USD demand declines? One possible scenario, discussed often, is that holders of US government debt face pressure. If you reduce demand for USD assets, you reduce support for yields and pricing, and market reactions could become chaotic because the US financial system is deeply interconnected with global credit. Now, you may be thinking, this sounds too big and too complex for your daily life. But the hidden self in you already knows this affects your daily life. It affects your rent, your groceries, your job security, your ability to save, your future. Because every financial shift eventually becomes a shift in prices. That's how economic gravity works. And this is where people get the most uncomfortable misunderstanding. They think gold goes up because gold becomes more valuable. But the more precise truth is harsher. Gold can rise because the paper currency is losing buying power. So gold is not exactly increasing in intrinsic value like it's developing superpowers. A gold bar is still a gold bar. It can still only buy roughly the same type of luxury or provisions in historical terms. The change is what the currency can buy. When currency loses power, gold becomes the measuring stick. This is the same trick governments use with inflation narratives. They tell you inflation is 2 point something, 3%, 5%. They give you a comforting number and expect you to relax. But you live in reality, not in statistics. Your cost of living doesn't increase by 5% because someone averaged data. Your costs move in clusters. Rent jumps, food jumps, insurance jumps, energy jumps, and the total experience becomes something harsher than the headline. Inflation is not only a technical phenomenon, it's a transfer of wealth disguised as arithmetic. It's a slow robbery. While you're busy recalculating your budget every month, your savings quietly lose power. Meanwhile, the people who understand the process protect themselves by holding assets that resist currency dilution. Gold doesn't pay interest. That's why many people reject it emotionally. They want money to make money. They want a scoreboard. But the real function of gold is preservation. It keeps its role as a store of purchasing power when currency regimes fail under pressure. So if you keep hearing gold is a hedge, that phrase is not marketing fluff. It's a confession that paper can be unreliable. It's an admission that you should not anchor your survival to something that can be expanded at will. Now here's the brutal psychological mirror. People only buy hedges when their emotions finally catch up with their fears. In the beginning, they rationalize. They deny. They say inflation is temporary. They say it can't happen here. They say the experts say it's fine. And then prices keep rising and their denial becomes expensive. When that expense finally becomes unavoidable, they switch from denial to action. But by then, they are late. The late decision is always more painful. That's why a part of you never wants to hear this video, because you know it could have helped you earlier and you hate the feeling of being responsible for wasted time. So let's talk about what rising gold in a stressed monetary environment does to people in emerging markets. When USD moves, smaller currencies can get dragged into the current. If a population is already sensitive to price shocks, the result can be a rapid loss of trust. People start buying gold and foreign currencies because they want something that doesn't collapse with their local currency. Then the loop becomes vicious. When enough people buy foreign currency, the local currency weakens further. The weakening increases panic, which fuels more buying. It becomes self-reinforcing. It's not only economic, it's emotional. People behave based on fear contagion. Once fear becomes the crowd's operating system, official policy can't stop it. You can set rates, you can release statements, you can threaten enforcement, but you can't easily change a population's internal logic. I don't believe the system will protect my purchasing power, so I will protect myself. And that's why you keep hearing the phrase CBDC in discussions about financial control. Central bank digital currency is often framed as modernization or efficiency, but the psychological reality is about governance. If the currency becomes programmable, then the state can shape transactions. Not always openly, but invisibly. Now don't confuse this with Bitcoin. The point of CBDC is not decentralization, it's control. It's the ability to monitor and potentially restrict flows. If you can restrict flows, you can steer behavior. And if you can steer behavior, you can reduce the speed at which a population runs to safety assets. But here's the hidden self-truth. Even control has limits. If a digital currency is not anchored to something people trust, then it becomes the same story as paper gold, just in a new costume. A refined illusion. A new promise with the same vulnerability, belief. If the public believes the CBDC is safe, then it circulates smoothly. If trust fractures, then control doesn't fix the fracture, it just accelerates the moral conflict inside society. People start feeling surveilled, they start feeling cornered. They start feeling that the state doesn't serve them, it manages them. So the future is not only about gold prices, it's about the relationship between individuals and institutions. It's about whether your money belongs to you psychologically and practically, or whether it belongs to someone else who can decide the conditions of access. Now, you might ask, what should an ordinary person do? Not what should a strategist do. What should a person with rent and bills and a job do? The first instruction is not buy gold. The first instruction is stop